betrayed by her best friend, the shocking murder of her family. Hook. What would you do if your best friend betrayed you and you were trapped in a deadly game with no way out? Mina thought she knew who she could trust, until the truth shattered everything. Get ready for a twist you won't see coming. Stay with us, because the shocking ending will leave you speechless. Her house was quiet. Too quiet. The air felt heavy. The silence gnawed at her. Mina stepped into the living room. Her eyes darted, searching for something. Or someone. Her best friend, Kanya, was supposed to be there. They had plans, but the room felt wrong. The curtains were drawn, the lights off, the familiar scent of coffee absent. She called out, "Kanya?" No answer. Her heart began to race. A faint sound echoed. Footsteps? No. It was the ticking of the clock. She glanced around. The space felt like it was closing in on her. A chill swept through her spine. Her phone buzzed. A message from Kanya. Asterisk, I'll be there soon. Don't worry. Asterisk. Mina frowned. The message seemed off, like it wasn't really from Kanya. She moved toward the kitchen. Something was wrong. The door to the back room was ajar. The door creaked as she pushed it open. She froze. A shadow moved in the corner. Kanya stood there, but her face wasn't right. It was pale, her eyes wide. Mina's pulse quickened. "Kanya," she whispered, stepping closer. But Kanya didn't answer. Something was wrong. The room smelled strange, like iron. Mina's eyes darted to the floor. Blood. There was blood. Everywhere. The sight made her stomach twist. And then she saw it. Her children. Lifeless. She gasped, stumbling backward. Her breath caught in her throat. Her children. Her babies. Kanya's twisted smile grew wider. Mina tried to speak, but her voice failed. Her mind was racing. She couldn't understand. Why? Why would Kanya do this? Her heart pounded in her chest. Kanya's voice was soft. "So sorry, Mina, but you were always in the way." The words hit like a slap. Kanya raised her hand. The glint of a knife caught the light. Mina stumbled back, but Kanya was too fast. The blade flashed. Pain surged through Mina's side. She screamed, but no one would hear her. Kanya's face hovered over her. Her lips curled into a sadistic grin. Mina's vision blurred. The last thing she saw was Kanya's face, the woman who was once her best friend. Her breath slowed. Her world went dark. Mina's body went limp. Her thoughts were fading, but there was something inside her that still fought. A spark, a flicker of life. Her eyes fluttered open. She was lying on the cold floor, blood pooling around her. The pain was unbearable, but she couldn't die yet. She had to know. Why? Why had Kanya done this? Her breath was shallow. Her vision blurred. The house was still silent. But Kanya wasn't there anymore. Mina's fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. It felt like an eternity before she found it. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. She dialed 911 with trembling hands, her voice barely a whisper. "Please help. Kanya." She couldn't finish the sentence. Her throat was closing up. The line went dead. Mina's phone slipped from her hand. She closed her eyes. Darkness enveloped her again. But this time, she heard a sound. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Was it Kanya? Mina's heart skipped a beat. No, it wasn't Kanya. She could tell. The door creaked open. A figure stood in the doorway. The dim light revealed a man's face. His eyes locked onto hers. She didn't recognize him, but there's something about him. The man knelt beside her. His touch was cold, clinical. "Stay with me," he whispered. He wasn't there to hurt her. Not yet, at least. Mina gasped, her breath ragged. Her mind swirled. Who was this man? And why was he here? His hands moved expertly, stopping the blood flow from her wound. But she wasn't sure if it was enough. Everything was slipping. The man spoke again, his voice calm but chilling. "It's not over yet." What did he mean? Her vision dimmed. The last thing she remembered was his face, cold and unreadable. And then nothing. Mina awoke to the sharp sting of cold air. Her body felt heavy, like it was submerged in ice water. She blinked, her eyes struggling to focus. The man was gone. She was alone. But something was different. Her surroundings didn't feel familiar. The room she was in was small, dimly lit. White walls. No windows. It smelled sterile, like a hospital. She tried to sit up, but her body refused to obey. Pain shot through her side. She gasped, her breath ragged. The sound of a door opening echoed through the silence. A figure appeared in the doorway. Not Kanya. Not the man. This was someone else. A woman. She was tall, dressed in a long, dark coat. Her eyes were cold, calculating. Mina's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" Mina croaked, her voice hoarse. The woman didn't answer at first. She stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking on the floor. Mina instinctively tried to move away, but her body was too weak. "You've been brought here for a reason," the woman said finally, her voice smooth, almost soothing. Mina's heart raced. She didn't understand. Brought here? For what reason? The woman crouched beside her. Her gaze was piercing. "I know you're confused," she continued, her tone almost sympathetic. "But your life is no longer yours to control." Mina's stomach turned. What did that mean? "Where am I?" she managed to whisper. "Does it matter?" the woman asked, almost to herself. Mina swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room. There were no windows, no doors except the one the woman had entered from. Her mind was racing. Her children, her best friend, Kanya. What had happened? The woman leaned closer. "You don't remember yet, do you?" she asked. Mina shook her head weakly. "Let me help you," the woman continued. And then a memory surged. Kanya's twisted smile, the blood, the cold glint of the knife, her children. The woman watched her intently as the pieces began to fall into place. "Kanya didn't just kill your kids, Mina," she said softly. Mina's breath hitched. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The woman smiled a cold, unsettling smile. "Kanya killed them because she had to." Mina felt her heart stop. Kanya didn't have a choice, Mina. She was just following orders. "Orders?" Mina choked out. "From who?" The woman's smile faded. "From the one who's been controlling everything. From the one who's been watching you all along." Mina's head swam. The pieces didn't fit. Her mind was unraveling. She couldn't process what the woman was saying. But wise," Mina whispered, her voice cracking. The woman's cold eyes stared back at her. "You're part of something much bigger than you think." A sickening realization dawned on Mina. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Mina's heart hammered in her chest. The woman's words hung in the air, thick with menace. Something bigger? Mina couldn't comprehend it. She couldn't even remember how she'd ended up here, let alone the connection between all of this and her children's deaths. The woman's eyes never left her. They were calculating, waiting for her to understand. Mina's breath was shallow. The pain in her side was unbearable, but her mind was sharp, desperate to make sense of it all. The woman reached into her coat, pulling out a small device. It glowed faintly. She tapped it with a finger, and a screen flickered to life. Mina's stomach churned. On the screen there was a face. Familiar. Kanya. But her expression was different. Cold. Empty. Her best friend, no, her betrayer, was staring at her from the screen, her eyes lifeless. Mina's pulse surged. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. She's been under surveillance, the woman said, as if the answer was obvious. Mina's mind whirled. Surveillance? Her best friend, Kanya? The woman's eyes narrowed. You weren't supposed to remember, Mina. Remember what? Mina gasped, her voice rising in panic. The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it was devoid of any warmth. That you were never meant to survive. A chill ran down Mina's spine. Her body froze, as if her mind couldn't accept what the woman was implying. What do you mean? She whispered, barely able to breathe. The woman stepped back, her eyes now gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. You were a part of a test, she said. A test of loyalty, survival, and obedience. Mina's vision blurred. Her head swam. Test. What did she mean? You've been part of a program, Mina. One that's been manipulating you, your family, your friends, for years. No. Mina cried, her voice shaking with disbelief. The woman's eyes darkened. You've been in this game longer than you realize. You never stood a chance. Mina's mind was spinning, the words sinking in like daggers. She was part of something. A program? But why? What is this program? Mina asked, desperation in her voice. The woman chuckled softly, like she had been waiting for that question. It's simple. A controlled environment. You were all pawns. And now, she paused, letting the words hang in the air. Now, the final phase begins. Mina's stomach dropped. Her hands trembled. Her thoughts scattered. The woman leaned in close. Your best friend, Kanya, was sent to finish you off. No. Mina gasped, her throat tightening. Kanya wouldn't do that. She's my friend. The woman's laugh echoed in the room. Kanya was never your friend. She was a participant, just like you. Mina's eyes widened. The shock was unbearable. She couldn't breathe, but the woman wasn't done. You've been watched your entire life, Mina. Every choice you made, every decision controlled. And now it's time for the final test. Who will survive? Who will betray? Mina's pulse raced. The world around her felt like it was collapsing. Her best friend, her children, her life. All of it had been a lie. Mina's breath came in sharp gasps. She couldn't process the words. Her mind screamed for answers. She tried to sit up, but the pain in her side was too much. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she reached for the edges of the cold metal bed. The woman stood above her, watching with cold amusement. What is this test? Mina whispered, the words barely forming. The woman's smile was slow, deliberate. It's not about survival, Mina, she said, her voice almost too calm. It's about control, about who has the power, who can break, and who can stay loyal. Mina's heart pounded. Loyalty? To who? To what? Her mind was spinning, but the woman's words echoed louder and louder. Her memories were shattering. Fragments of her life, her children, Kanya, all slipping through her fingers. You've already failed, the woman continued. You were never meant to escape, Mina. Not really. Kanya wasn't meant to kill you. She was meant to test you, to see if you would break. And now, she has failed too. Mina's stomach twisted. Kanya failed, she murmured, her voice shaking. The woman nodded slowly. Yes, Kanya was supposed to follow the orders, to finish what was started. But she let you slip away, and that's where you got lucky. Mina's blood ran cold. Lucky, she repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. You're telling me that Kanya was supposed to kill me? After everything we've been through? The woman's eyes flickered with a hint of pity, but it was gone in an instant. It's not personal. It's never been personal, she said. This was never about friendship or family. It's about who can be controlled, who can be shaped into something stronger. Mina's mind raced, her thoughts colliding. She couldn't believe it. Her life, everything, had been orchestrated. And Kanya, the one person she trusted most, had been part of it all. Mina closed her eyes, trying to steady herself, but the weight of the truth crushed her. The woman's voice was low, almost soothing now. You've been in the game since the beginning. Every move, every decision monitored, controlled. The program doesn't care about feelings or loyalty. It only cares about who wins. Mina's chest tightened. Who wins? She could barely think through the fog of confusion, the weight of betrayal suffocating her. But you're not out yet, Mina, the woman said, her voice now more sinister. This game isn't over. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her eyes snapped open. What do you mean? She gasped. What do you want from me? The woman leaned in, her face just inches from Mina's. The question, Mina, is not what I want from you. The real question is what you will do next. You have a choice. Survive or be erased. Mina's blood ran cold at the finality of her words. Erased. Her mind screamed in panic. Her life, her family, her very existence, was it all just a test? The woman stepped back, her cold smile returning. I'll leave you to think on it. The clock is ticking, Mina. With that, she turned and disappeared through the door, leaving Mina alone in the sterile room. Alone. In the silence, the weight of her reality settled in. She had to survive. But how? Who could she trust? And who had truly betrayed her? Her breath caught in her throat as the door clicked shut behind her. The final phase had begun. Mina's heart raced as she lay there, trying to make sense of everything. The coldness of the room pressed against her, suffocating her thoughts. What was she supposed to do now? Survive? But how? Who was behind this? The woman, the program. Kanya? Her best friend. The one she thought she knew. How could Kanya be part of this twisted game? Her children. The thought of them brought an ache so deep, it felt like her chest might split open. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the pain. But the truth was relentless. There was no escaping it. And then there was the woman's warning. The clock is ticking. Mina's thoughts turned to the door. It was locked. She tried to sit up again, but her body screamed in protest. The wound on her side felt like it was burning. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Something or someone. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Her mind was numb. But a sudden burst of clarity hit her. If she didn't do something, anything, she would be erased. She didn't even know what that meant, but it sounded like it would be worse than death. She couldn't let that happen. Mina's eyes scanned the small, sterile room. Her gaze settled on a small table near the corner. On it, there was a single metal object, a pair of scissors. It wasn't much, but it was something. With what little strength she had, Mina dragged herself to the table, her fingers brushing against the cold surface. She took the scissors in her trembling hands. They felt heavier than they should have. Her body shook as she gripped them, the metal cool against her skin. Every inch of her screamed in fear. But she had to do this. She had no choice. Suddenly, the door creaked open again. Mina froze. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The figure stepped inside. It was the woman. Her eyes gleamed, studying Mina. But this time, there's something different. A slight hint of amusement. You're still alive, she said, her voice almost mocking. Mina's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't drop the scissors. She couldn't show weakness. The woman stepped closer, her smile widening. Trying to escape? She asked, as if the idea was laughable. Mina didn't answer. Her grip on the scissors tightened. The woman's smile faded. Her eyes narrowed. Do you really think you can survive this? She asked, voice low and dangerous. Mina's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. I will. I won't let you control me. I won't let you erase me. The woman didn't laugh this time. She stepped forward again, closer, until she was almost within arm's reach. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Mina's body tensed. The woman's gaze flicked to the scissors in her hand, and her lips curled in a cruel smile. "You're fooling yourself, Mina. You think you have control. You have nothing." Mina's breath was shallow, her vision blurred, but she held her ground. The woman reached out. Her fingers brushed against Mina's arm. It was icy cold. In that moment, something snapped inside Mina. No more waiting. No more fear. With all the strength she could muster, she lunged forward. The scissors glinted in the low light, aimed straight at the woman's chest. But she wasn't fast enough. The woman twisted, sidestepping with ease. Before Mina could react, a hand gripped her wrist, twisting it painfully. The scissors fell to the floor with a sharp clatter. Mina gasped, her arm throbbing with the pressure. "You're not in control, Mina," the woman whispered, her grip unrelenting. Mina's body went limp with the pain, but her mind was still fighting. She had to survive. She had to. The woman's eyes bored into hers. "I told you, you have no choice. You will either be erased or you'll become part of the game." Mina's breath hitched. Her heart pounded in her chest. She was running out of time, but Mina's mind raced, her pulse thundering in her ears. The woman's grip was like steel, unwavering and cold. She couldn't let this be the end. The pain in her wrist was excruciating, but she refused to let it control her. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that could help. The woman was too close now, her face looming, her eyes cold and calculating. "Do you feel it?" the woman asked, her voice low. The power slipping away. Mina's breath came in sharp, desperate gasps. She couldn't let go. Not yet. "Let go, Mina," the woman urged, her grip tightening. Let go of the fight. Every inch of Mina's body screamed in defiance, but she fought back against the grip, focusing all her energy on one thought: survive. She twisted her body with a burst of energy, using her remaining strength. With a painful yank, she broke free from the woman's hold. Mina staggered back, breathless, her body trembling. She hadn't expected that. The woman stood motionless for a moment, her eyes narrowing in something close to surprise. Then the smile returned. It wasn't kind. It was cruel. "You're persistent," she said, her voice laced with venom. "But you're still not in control." Mina's body was shaking, her mind reeling from the shock, but she didn't back down. The woman moved again, faster this time. But Mina wasn't going to let her get close. She spotted the scissors on the floor, just a few feet away. Her heart skipped a beat. It was her only chance. She scrambled toward them, her hand brushing the cold metal, and just as the woman lunged, Mina swung the scissors upward, aiming directly at her attacker. The woman dodged, but only barely. Mina felt her heart race as she continued to fight, her breathing erratic. The woman's eyes flared with fury. "You think this will stop me?" she spat. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mina." But Mina didn't care anymore. She couldn't care. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. She had no time to waste. She couldn't think of anything else except the now, the fight, the struggle, the need to escape. The woman advanced again, her hands reaching for Mina's throat. But in a flash of movement, Mina shoved the scissors straight into her abdomen. The woman gasped, stumbling back, her eyes wide with shock. Mina stood frozen, her breath ragged, the bloodied scissors still in her hand. The woman looked at her for a moment, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she dropped to her knees. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence stretched out, filled with the sharp ringing in Mina's ears. Finally, the woman collapsed to the floor, her eyes still open, her chest no longer rising and falling. Mina's body trembled. She had done it. She had survived. But the relief was fleeting. As the woman's body lay still, another sound filled the room. A soft click. A door opening. Mina's breath caught in her throat as she turned toward the sound. A man stepped into the room. His eyes were dark, calculating, just like the woman's. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. Mina's blood ran cold. The man's voice was calm, almost too calm. Her heart pounded again. Who was this? What was going on? The man stepped closer, and for the first time, Mina noticed the way his hand rested near his waist. He was armed. "You think you're free now?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Mina stood frozen, her legs unsteady, her mind trying to comprehend what was happening. "You're part of something much bigger than you know, Mina," he continued. "You've made a choice, but it's not your choice to make." Her breath hitched. Her world was slipping away again. Had she really survived? Or had she just fallen deeper into the game? "Welcome to the next phase," the man said, his voice darkening. And then the door closed behind him, leaving Mina alone in the suffocating silence. Mina's heart pounded in her chest, the sound echoing in her ears. She stood there, trembling, with the bloody scissors still in her hand. Her breath was shallow, her body shaking from the adrenaline, but her mind was racing faster than her heart. The door slammed shut behind the man. She was alone again. The silence felt suffocating, heavier than ever before. Every part of her wanted to break down, to collapse onto the floor and give in to the overwhelming fear. But something deeper inside her told her she couldn't. Not yet. She couldn't let them control her. She couldn't let them win. Her eyes darted to the woman's lifeless body on the floor. Mina's stomach churned at the sight, but she forced herself to look away. There was no time for grief. The man's words replayed in her mind. "You've made a choice, but it's not your choice to make." A cold shiver ran down her spine. What did he mean? What was happening? She gripped the scissors tighter, the metal cold and comforting in her hand. But her mind was still clouded with questions, with confusion, with fear. She had to think. Mina glanced around the room, her eyes scanning every corner for an escape, some way out of this nightmare. There had to be something. A window, a door, a hidden passage. But no, this was it. A small, windowless room with only one door. And now it was locked tight. Her chest tightened. Her thoughts were spiraling. She couldn't let herself fall apart. She had to survive. Survive. The word burned in her mind, louder and louder with each passing second. She slowly stepped away from the woman's body, her eyes still glued to the door. Her hand trembled as she pressed against the cold wall, trying to steady herself. She needed answers. She needed a plan. The man's cryptic words circled in her head like vultures. Was she just a pawn, a part of some game, a piece in a twisted puzzle? Her heart raced again as her mind began to piece together fragments. Kanya, the woman, the man. It was all connected. The woman had said she wasn't supposed to survive, but Mina had. Had Kanya known? Had she been part of this all along? Her chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't fear that gripped her. It was anger. Anger at the lies. Anger at the betrayal. And most of all, anger at being treated like a pawn in someone else's sick game. But what could she do? She had no answers. No real plan. Just the scissors in her hand and a mind full of questions. Mina turned to face the door. Her heartbeat quickened as she inched toward it, listening for any sound, any movement. The room felt smaller, closing in on her. The silence was unbearable. She reached for the doorknob, testing it cautiously. Locked. Her heart sank. She was trapped. And then she heard it. A faint click. The door. It was opening. Her breath caught in her throat as she pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. The door creaked open, just a crack, enough for a shadow to fall across the floor. A figure stood there, just beyond the threshold. Mina's pulse quickened. Was it the man? Was he back? But then a voice, a familiar voice, cut through the tension. "Mina, are you there?" Her heart stopped. It was Kanya's voice, her best friend. Mina's hands shook uncontrollably. Could it be Kanya? Mina took a step forward. Her breath caught in her throat. "Kanya," she whispered, her voice shaky. The figure stepped into the room, and Mina's heart dropped. It was her, Kanya, but she didn't look the same. Her eyes were cold, distant, as if everything that had happened between them had been erased. "Kanya," Mina said again, her voice cracking. "What's happening? Why did you do this? Why did you—" But Kanya held up a hand, silencing her. "I'm sorry, Mina," Kanya said softly, her tone devoid of emotion. "But I can't help you." Mina's heart shattered in her chest. The woman had been right. Kanya had betrayed her. She had never been her friend. The silence between them felt suffocating. Mina's eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly, not wanting to show weakness. She had to survive. She had to survive, even if it meant facing the truth. Kanya took a step back, her eyes never leaving Mina's. "You're part of something bigger than you think," she said quietly, her voice flat. The words echoed in Mina's head. She was part of something bigger? The door closed behind Kanya with a soft click, leaving Mina standing in the center of the room. Her body felt heavy, the weight of betrayal almost too much to bear. But she didn't have time to mourn. The clock was ticking, and she was running out of time. Mina stood frozen, the echo of the door's soft click still ringing in her ears. Kanya was gone. Her best friend, the one person who had once been her anchor, gone. Mina's chest tightened with the raw pain of betrayal, but she didn't let herself fall apart. Not yet. She couldn't afford that. There was something deeper, darker at play, and she had to understand it. She had to fight it. She turned away from the door, her mind racing. Kanya's cold words echoed in her head. "You're part of something bigger than you think." What did it all mean? Why had Kanya done this? Why was she playing along? The questions were suffocating, but Mina knew she couldn't waste time wondering. She had to move. Every part of her screamed to escape, to get out of this nightmare. But the reality was clear. She was trapped, with no way out, no one to trust. Her eyes darted around the room once again, searching for something, anything, that could help her. The walls felt like they were closing in. She stumbled toward the window, but as she expected, it was sealed shut. She tried the door again. Locked. No way out. Mina's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The woman, the man, Kanya, they were all part of this twisted game. But who was pulling the strings? Who was behind it all? Mina swallowed hard. Her breath was shaky, her body exhausted from the mental and physical toll. But she refused to give in. She couldn't. Not after everything. Not after Kanya's betrayal. Suddenly, there was a noise from behind her. Mina spun around, her heart racing in her chest. A figure stood in the doorway. It wasn't Kanya. It wasn't the man. The new figure was tall, their face hidden in shadow. A dark, imposing presence. For a moment, Mina's blood ran cold. Who was this? What did they want? The figure stepped into the room slowly, their footsteps almost soundless. Mina backed up instinctively, her hand brushing against the cold metal wall. The figure didn't speak at first. They just watched her, their presence suffocating. Finally, the voice broke the silence. "You're not supposed to be here," the figure said, their voice low, almost mechanical. Mina's pulse quickened. What do you mean?" she gasped. The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, they stepped closer, their eyes gleaming from the darkness. "You've been a part of this from the beginning, Mina," they said, their tone almost like a whisper. "You were chosen." Chosen? Her mind spun with the implications. Chosen for what? Her chest tightened again, the weight of their words pressing on her. What is this? Why am I here? She demanded, her voice shaking but defiant. The figure stepped forward again, now within arm's reach. You were supposed to be part of the experiment, they said, the words heavy with meaning. But now things have changed. You don't follow the rules. You don't fit into the plan. Mina's heart pounded in her throat. Experiment? Rules? What was he talking about? You've become an obstacle, Mina, the figure continued, their voice colder now. And obstacles are dealt with. A chill ran down her spine. She was no longer just a participant. She was a problem. Mina's grip on the scissors tightened, but her body was trembling. She couldn't let him, whatever he was, get close. Who are you? She demanded again, her voice desperate. But the figure's face remained hidden in the shadows, their expression unreadable. I am part of the same thing you are, they said softly, and I am here to finish what was started. Mina's mind raced. What was started? She had to think. She had to do something. The figure stepped forward again, and this time, Mina could feel their cold gaze on her. It was like the air had turned to ice, the silence suffocating. Without thinking, she lunged forward, the scissors aimed directly at them. But in a blur of movement, the figure grabbed her wrist, twisting it violently. She gasped, the sharp pain cutting through her entire body. Her fingers opened involuntarily, and the scissors fell to the floor with a sharp clatter. The figure looked down at her, their grip tightening. Fighting back is pointless, they said quietly, their voice now almost sympathetic. You don't have the power to change this. Mina's body screamed for escape, but she was trapped, and the figure's grip on her wrist was like iron. She could feel the life draining out of her with every passing second. But then, something in her snapped. She couldn't let them win. She wouldn't. With every last bit of strength, she jerked her arm free, slamming her elbow into the figure's side. They stumbled back, momentarily off balance. Mina's breath came in ragged gasps as she scrambled for the scissors. This was her only chance. She grabbed them just as the figure regained their footing, their eyes flashing with fury. Enough of this, they hissed. Before Mina could react, the figure advanced once more, and she knew, this time, there would be no escape. Mina's heart slammed in her chest as the figure lunged forward. Every part of her screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The room was too small, too confined. Her only weapon was in her hand, but her grip on the scissors was weak. Her body was trembling, and her breath came in shallow gasps. The figure was close now, too close. She could feel the coldness of their presence, the weight of inevitability pressing down on her. Please, Mina whispered, barely able to get the words out. But the figure didn't answer. They didn't need to. They were going to end this, and she wouldn't be able to stop them. But then something happened. A flash of movement. A loud crash. The figure stumbled back, thrown off balance. Mina's eyes widened as the sound of metal scraping against the floor echoed in the room. The door, the one that had been locked tight, had been kicked open. Another figure stood there, their silhouette stark against the dim light. Mina's pulse jumped in her throat. Was it? It was him. The man from before. The one who had warned her. The one who had said she wasn't in control. His eyes met hers for a brief second, and without another word, he reached forward and grabbed the figure by the shoulders, yanking them away from Mina with terrifying strength. For a moment, everything stood still. The figure glared at the man, their face twisted in fury. You think you can stop me, the figure hissed. But the man didn't answer. He twisted the figure's arm behind their back, forcing them to their knees. Mina watched, her breath coming in jagged bursts, her mind trying to process what was happening. Who was this man? Why had he come for her now? But she didn't have time to think about that. Not yet. The figure let out a low growl, but the man's grip tightened. "Stay out of this, Mina," the man said, his voice low and dangerous. Mina's chest tightened at the warning, but she didn't move. She couldn't, not with the figure still struggling against the man's grip. The man seemed to know exactly what she was thinking. He glanced back at her quickly, his eyes sharp. "You need to trust me," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made her heart race. Trust him? She had no choice but to. Mina tightened her grip on the scissors, ready to defend herself if needed. The figure snarled, their eyes filled with rage. "You think you've won," they spat. "This is far from over." And then, the man did something Mina hadn't expected. In one swift motion, he shoved the figure toward the corner of the room, pinning them against the wall. "Get out of here," the man growled. But the figure didn't seem to listen. Instead, they laughed, a low, chilling sound. Mina's mind spun. Who were these people? And why was she caught in the middle of all this? The man turned to her again, his eyes narrowing. "We don't have much time. We need to leave now." Leave. Mina's heart skipped a beat. Leave. Where would they go? And who was this man? But before she could ask, he grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the open door. She stumbled, disoriented, but the man's grip was firm, and she found herself following him without thinking. They moved down a long, dimly lit hallway, and Mina's thoughts raced. What was happening? Why was she being pulled into this strange, dark world of secrets and betrayals? As they turned a corner, the sound of footsteps behind them echoed in the hallway. Mina glanced over her shoulder. The figure was following. No, it wasn't over. Her heart pounded harder as the man urged her to move faster. "Come on," he said urgently. "This way." They rushed down another hallway, but Mina could feel the figure gaining on them. She was too slow. They were too slow. Mina's breath caught as they reached another locked door. The man didn't hesitate. He pulled something from his pocket, a small metal device, and inserted it into the lock. With a soft click, the door opened. "Go," he ordered. Mina didn't need any more encouragement. She ran inside, the door slamming shut behind her with a loud thud. But as the echoes of her footsteps faded, she realized one horrifying truth. She was alone again, and the man, he was gone. The room was dark, with no windows, no way to see where she was. Mina pressed her back against the cold wall, her breath shallow. What now? The silence was suffocating, pressing in on her from all sides. And then she heard it again, the sound of footsteps. But these footsteps were different. They weren't the same as the ones she had just outrun. These footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they echoed with a finality that made her blood run cold. Who was coming for her now? Mina's heart raced. Her breath caught in her throat as the door slowly creaked open. The light from the hallway cut into the darkness of the room. And there, standing in the doorway, a new figure, tall, shadowed, silent. It was the man. But something was different. Something was very wrong. The man's face was hidden, but Mina could see the faint glint of something in his eyes. And then, without a word, he stepped inside. Mina's heart raced as the man stepped into the dimly lit room, his shadow casting long, eerie shapes on the walls. The door clicked shut behind him, plunging them into darkness once again. Mina's pulse hammered in her ears, her breath shallow and quick. This wasn't the same man from before. This one was different. The air felt heavier now, thicker, as if it were closing in around her. She could feel the tension in every fiber of her being. She stepped back instinctively, her back pressing against the cold wall, eyes locked on the man. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear and confusion. The man didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, unmoving, his dark figure looming like a specter in the corner of her vision. For a moment, it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting. Mina's hands were still shaking, but her grip tightened around the scissors. She had to defend herself. She had no other choice. The man's eyes gleamed with something cold and distant. "Don't bother," he said, his voice low and smooth. "You won't get away. Not this time." Mina's mind raced, trying to make sense of the words. Not this time. What did he mean by that? Was she meant to be trapped forever in this nightmare? The room seemed to close in on her. There was no way out. No escape. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest as the man took a step forward. His footsteps were deliberate, calculated, like a predator stalking its prey. And then, just as quickly as he had entered, he stopped. A small, unsettling smile spread across his lips. "You don't understand yet, do you?" he asked, his voice almost mocking. "This is all part of the plan." Mina's breath caught in her throat. The plan? Her mind was spinning, trying to put together the pieces. She had been part of something bigger, something twisted and manipulative. But what was the plan? Her head swam with the questions, and she could barely keep up. The man took another step forward, and this time, she didn't back away. She couldn't. Her body was paralyzed with a mix of fear and determination. "Who are you really?" she asked again, her voice more forceful now, despite the fear. The man's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "I am the one who's been watching you," he said slowly, "the one who made sure everything was set in motion. You're part of something much bigger than you think. You've always been." Mina's chest tightened. Her mind raced. Asterisk, this was bigger than just her survival. It had always been asterisk. The pieces fell into place. She wasn't the only one involved in this twisted game. She had always been part of it, whether she knew it or not. The silence between them felt like a suffocating fog. The man stepped closer, his presence oppressive. "You're a pawn in a game, Mina," he said softly. "But don't worry. There's still time for you to make a choice. The right choice." Her heart skipped a beat. A choice? What did that mean? Her hand trembled as she held the scissors, but her mind was made up. Mina wasn't going to be anyone's pawn anymore. With a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline, she lunged at the man, scissors aimed directly at him. But the man's hand shot out faster than she could react, gripping her wrist with terrifying strength. He twisted it, forcing the scissors from her hand. Her breath came in ragged gasps as he pinned her against the wall, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't understand, do you?" he whispered. "You've always been a part of this, Mina. You don't get to walk away." Mina's body trembled, her mind racing to process everything. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep fighting. Her vision blurred with tears as she stared into the man's cold, unfeeling eyes. And then, just as quickly as he had arrived, the grip on her wrist loosened. The man stepped back, almost as if he had decided she wasn't worth the effort anymore. Mina's body slumped, exhausted, her mind reeling. But as she looked up at him, she realized one thing. It wasn't over. He hadn't won. Not yet. She wouldn't let him. With one last surge of strength, Mina broke free and sprinted toward the door. This time, she didn't stop. She didn't look back. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to hope Mina ran, her heart pounding in her chest as her feet hit the cold floor with frantic desperation. The door, now wide open, beckoned her like the only hope she had left. Behind her, she could hear the sound of the man's footsteps echoing down the hallway, but she didn't dare look back. She couldn't. The air felt thick with dread, the walls pressing in as if trying to trap her once again. But she refused to be swallowed by it. The hallway stretched ahead of her, endless and winding, but it didn't matter. She had only one goal now: escape. Her breath was ragged, her vision blurred by the tears streaming down her face, but she pushed forward. She had to. The distant sound of the man's voice echoed behind her, low and threatening. "You can't run forever, Mina. It's too late for that. But Mina didn't stop. She couldn't afford to hear his words. She had already heard too many lies. Her mind flashed back to Kanya's cold betrayal, to the twisted games she had unknowingly been caught in. But this time, there was no room for doubt, no room for confusion. The truth had come crashing down on her, and she had to embrace it. She was no longer a pawn in anyone's game. She was free. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on her chest lifted just slightly. Mina reached a door at the end of the hall, her hand trembling as she gripped the handle. She threw it open, her eyes squinting as she stepped into the night air. Outside, the cool breeze felt like a rebirth. It hit her like a wave, washing away the suffocating feeling of being trapped. She was outside. She was free. But as she stumbled into the open space, her breath caught in her throat. Standing in front of her, blocking her path, was a car. The door opened, and a figure stepped out. It wasn't the man. It wasn't Kanya. It was the woman from before. The one who had been watching her from the shadows. Her smile was cold, but there was something else in her eyes now. A sense of finality. "This is where it ends, Mina," the woman said softly. "But don't worry. It's all part of the plan." Mina's world tilted, her knees buckling beneath her. No, she wasn't done. She wouldn't let them win. Her hand shook as she reached into her pocket, feeling for the small phone. The one she had taken from the man earlier. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number. The woman's eyes flickered with recognition, but she didn't move. Mina pressed the phone to her ear, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not alone," she said, her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her. "I won't be." The woman's smile faltered for a moment, the air between them crackling with a sudden shift in tension. And then the sound of sirens, loud, blaring, unstoppable. The woman froze, her expression changing. Panic flashed in her eyes. Before she could move, the sound of multiple cars screeching to a halt filled the air. The police. Mina had made the call. She had broken free. As the officers flooded the area, the woman's smirk faded into a scowl. She turned to run, but it was too late. Mina watched as they apprehended her, as the plan she had once been part of unraveled before her eyes. Her body shook with relief. Mina was no longer trapped. She had fought her way out of the darkness. The weight of the past few days lifted from her shoulders, replaced by a new sense of freedom. She was free, for now at least. But Mina knew something deeper than all of this remained, something she couldn't quite understand, and she would find out what it was in her own time. But for now, she could breathe. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe.